the manifestation of God. Obviously, no one is going to be able to dispatch this properly. Yesterday morning at the shrine of the Bab, I was thinking about this after our prayers, and I remembered that Abdu'l-Baha, and of course Baha'u'llah himself, but Abdu'l-Baha had said that we have all been invited to the banquet of God. By the favors of the Blessed Perfection, He has spread a huge table of the Lord filled with sumptuous dishes and foods descended from heaven, heavenly food. Bread that He says if we partake of it, we will attain to everlasting life. But it's a big banquet table. The second inspiration of the morning came when I remembered that certain fine restaurants that have quite an array of main dishes offer taster's menus. And so this evening I would like to attempt a taster's menu. A bit of this, a bit of that, a little look at that prospect, a taste of this, a drink of some of this nectar, and hopefully that will stimulate all of us to go back to the books and partake of the real feast. A word of caution. What I'm going to say tonight is a cross point between what the writings say and what I understand. I think we've heard here from the previous speakers that what we say as individuals, of course, in no way represents the House of Justice. It does give you insight into the individuals who study the cause, who think about the writings. But just remember to check, as you should with anyone speaking about the teachings of the cause of God, check in your own mind what you know about the teachings. Does it fit? Does it match? Now, fortunately, there are all kinds of degrees and levels of understanding, spiritual states and stations in the cause, which enable us to penetrate the writings in diverse manners, which means that we all will not understand the same thing in the same way. But we can, with the guidance of the writings, realize that a spectrum of understandings is acceptable. We try, of course, each of us to combine the various passages that we read to come up with the clearest comprehension of the verities and fundamental teachings of the cause. And one of them, one of the central ones, of course, is the reality of the manifestation of God, the role of the manifestation of God in creation. The title of this evening could be The Manifestations of God, for in one sense, what we're going to say about the manifestation applies to all of them. But it's not meant to be a survey of progressive revelation in that sense, or a history of any of the individual manifestations, but rather what we can discern about the nature of the manifestation. Now, you're all aware that Baha'u'llah is the supreme manifestation of this universal cycle, that his teachings surpass the combined teachings of all the prophets of the past. Not that their light was lesser, but commensurate with the time of the coming of age of the human race, Baha'u'llah has been commissioned by God to deliver a revelation which is the supreme revelation for a period of 500,000 years. Now, we listen to that. What do we understand by it? One of the extraordinary things about this revelation is insight into the nature of the manifestation. That is, we have passages the likes of which we've never had in past revelations, about God, about a description of what knowledge of God consists of, about the nature and articulation of the different aspects of the person of the manifestation of God. We've never had such things. These are this terrific dishes that are on our banquet table that we couldn't have imagined in the past. Shoghi Effendi mentions the intimacy Baha'u'llah reveals to us, describes to us the moments in which he received divine revelation, which his mission was assigned to him when he was in the darkness and misery of the Sayyid Shah. And he describes how the personation of his name, the All-Glorious, this Maid of Heaven, which is really an embodiment of his own spirit, addresses him. And this, I think, is one of the signs of God's humility and modesty, that he creates a figure who points to Baha'u'llah. Rather than having Baha'u'llah say, "O people, I am the beloved of the worlds. Turn ye all towards me." He has the Maid of Heaven, this gorgeous creature that he's suggested to us, that addresses us and points to him and says, he's the one. He's the best beloved of God. And then he describes that torrent of water, of spiritual divine knowledge and water, which poured over him from on high and transformed him, and how in those moments people could hardly bear to hear the words and the verses which poured forth from his lips. He refers to this several times in the course of his writings. Central to the revelation, he tells us that God's purpose in creating the universe, in creating the solar system, in creating the planet Earth, is that there would be creatures who could become conscious of God, who might know, and through that knowledge, love and adore their Creator. He quotes, as does the Master in his commentary that he wrote when he was a teenager, the tradition where in the divine voice, from the words of Muhammad, it says, "I was a hidden treasure, and I desired to be known. Therefore, I created thee that thou mightest know me." Out of that comes the whole of creation. The motive of God is love for his creation, and his desire that we partake of that love, that we reflect it back, and in that partake, if you will, or extend our vision to encompass some of the qualities and names and attributes of God which are evident and mirrored forth by the manifestation into our hearts, and which are the means of transforming us from ordinary creatures into God-endowed spiritual beings. The nature of the manifestation, the description of the manifestation, the key passages, I think are the ones that Shoghi Effendi quotes in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah from the Kitab-i-Iqan. The Kitab-i-Iqan, which he has characterized as the preeminent doctrinal work of Baha'u'llah, is where you find so many of these essential truths and verities set forth. What then, beyond this purpose of and spirit of human existence, that is to know, to love, to worship and adore God, how do we know God? What is the Baha'i concept of God set forth in the writings? How is God defined? The essence of what's in the Iqan has been captured by Shoghi Effendi in a summary in God Passes By of the contents of the Kitab-i-Iqan. And he tells us, he proclaims, he says that the Iqan proclaims the existence and oneness of a personal God, unknowable, inaccessible, the source of all revelation, eternal, omniscient, omnipresent, and almighty. He goes on then to explain, in the Iqan, Baha'u'llah goes on to explain, in unnumbered passages which take on the character of the voice of divinity, the call of God himself. And he affirms in this key passage, "To every discerning and illumined heart, it is evident that God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immeasurably exalted beyond every human attribute, such as corporeal existence, ascent and descent, egress and regress. He is and hath ever been veiled in the ancient eternity of his essence, and will remain in his reality everlastingly hidden from the sight of men. He standeth exalted beyond and above all separation and union, all proximity and remoteness. God was alone. There was none else beside him, is a sure testimony of his truth. And then further speaking of God in another passage, he says, "From time immemorial, he, the divine being, hath been veiled in the ineffable sanctity of his exalted self, and will everlastingly continue to be wrapped in the impenetrable mystery of his unknowable essence." Here we come to the central position of the manifestation of God. We are told on the one hand we must know and love God, it's the purpose of creation, and on the other we have these countless passages and paragraphs that explain you'll never figure out anything about him, he's unapproachable, the door is closed, the way is barred. And you say, well, how am I going to fulfill my responsibilities in this sense? And then he moves on to explain the position of the manifestation of God. He says, "Having created the world and all that liveth and moveth therein, he, God, through the direct operation of his unconstrained and sovereign will, chose to confer upon man the unique distinction and capacity to know him and to love him, a capacity that must needs be regarded as the generating impulse and primary purpose underlying the whole of creation. Upon the inmost reality of each and every created thing, he hath shed the light of one of his names and made it a recipient of the glory of one of his attributes. Upon the reality of man, however, he hath focused the radiance of all his names and attributes and made it a mirror of his own self. Alone of all created things, man hath been singled out for so great a favor, so enduring a bounty. And the first among men, the foremost among men, is this manifestation of God, called the manifestation of God, he who manifests God amongst men. But he is not God himself come down to earth and taken on a human form. In his reality, he is a primary mirror, the primal mirrors of the light of God. Baha'u'llah refers to the manifestations, all of them. Then through his teachings, through the teachings of this day star of truth, every man is made to advance and develop until he attaineth the station at which he can manifest the potential forces with which his inmost true self hath been endowed, revealing to us that there is much in our human nature which we are not aware of. Gifts, potentialities, latent capacities that need to be stimulated. And what sets them in motion, what gives life and light to our understanding of these potentialities and our own true inner self, are the teachings of the manifestations of God. It is for this very purpose that in every age and dispensation the prophets of God and his chosen ones have appeared amongst men, and have evinced such power as is born of God, such might as only the eternal can reveal. Notwithstanding that there is no access to God, we have a few clues and explanations. Perhaps it struck you in the definition from God Passes By of Shoghi Effendi of God that he refers to him as a personal God. It struck, indeed, a number of believers, and they wrote the Guardian about this. What does this mean? And he wrote back through his secretary, what is meant by personal God is a God who is conscious of his creation. who has a mind, a will, a purpose, and not, as many scientists and materialists believe, an unconscious and determined force operating in the universe. To say that God is a personal reality does not mean that he has a physical form or does in any way resemble a human being. To entertain such belief would be sheer blasphemy. In the course of elaborating Baha'u'llah's teachings, Abdu'l-Baha refers to the three realms of existence. And these are mirrored in our Baha'i rings, these three lines, the parallel lines, horizontal parallel lines. We have the realm of the deity, of God himself. We have the realm of command, that is the world of the prophets of God in their inner nature, their universal singular reality. And then we have the world of creation. The world of creation, the realms of command itself is the world of creation, but out of that are sustained the outer realms of creation, spiritual realms, infinite spiritual worlds, and then this endless physical universe, material universe, where Baha'u'llah makes references, sometimes there's allusions that you just, it boggles the mind. He talks about how out of this sun of truth, the central orb of the universe, have been generated countless manifestations of God who address countless, innumerable creatures in all the worlds of God, both the spiritual worlds and endless physical worlds, whose number no man can calculate. When we think of the plenitude and fullness of God, if we look at his creation, he says that he's provided this to us as a mirror of himself. The most outstanding point of light being the manifestation of God himself. They asked Shoghi Effendi, what does the universal manifestation of God mean? Baha'u'llah is the universal manifestation. Does that mean he's the prophet of God for the whole universe? And Shoghi Effendi said, no, that he was particularly for this planet at this time. But that the nature of the universal manifestation was such that you couldn't put limitations on it, because he is the expression of the universal will of God, this world of command which surrounds all things as an ocean, an infinite ocean, in which we are the fish or the creatures that inhabit it. We're sustained by this ocean at all times. We cannot escape it. Baha'u'llah makes jest of it a bit. He says they're all depending on it, and they're asking, what is it and where is it? As if they couldn't tell, just like the fish is swimming in the water. He says, what water? What are you talking about? Through the impulse that comes from the manifestation of God, however, we are gradually awakened that there's something more in our nature. And through following such simple but essential teachings as the recitation of the obligatory prayers, as the practice of the annual 19-day fast, as the reading of the verses morning and evening, as the repetition of the Most Great Name 95 times a day, we assure ourselves sufficient spiritual nutrition to set in motion the growth of this new being, this spiritual reality within us. When we're very, very busy with our material affairs, generally it does not occur to us to stop eating. That is, I don't eat, I'm too busy, I have no time for lunch, breakfast, or dinner, and I will carry on my activities. And of course, those activities begin to dwindle. There's a perfect counterpart here with spiritual realities. We need to take in the nutrition that the manifestation of God has provided us. And we need to trust that carrying that forward provides a protection to us. It provides an assurance. It breathes the spirit of faith into our souls and our minds and our hearts. They asked Abdu'l-Baha, what is the spirit of faith? He said, the spirit of the faith is the Holy Spirit breathed into the spirit of man. Now, the embodiment of the Holy Spirit is the manifestation. The embodiment of the manifestation are the divine verses of God. When we partake of them, when we read them, when we rehearse them, when we recite them, they feed us. They give light to our hearts. They open us to the potentialities that are latent within us. The manifestation of God Himself expresses His wonderment at the unknowability of the Creator. From time immemorial, Baha'u'llah says, just as to repeat these verses, He, the divine being, hath been veiled in the ineffable sanctity of His exalted self, and will everlastingly continue to be wrapped in the impenetrable mystery of His unknowable essence. Then he states, 10,000 prophets, each a Moses, are thunderstruck upon the Sinai of their search at God's forbidding voice, thou shalt never behold me. Whilst a myriad messengers, each as great as Jesus, stand dismayed upon their heavenly thrones by the interdiction, mine essence, thou shalt never apprehend. This mysterious duality in the character of the manifestation of God, Baha'u'llah expresses in one of his communions. He says, how bewildering to me, insignificant as I am, is the attempt to fathom the sacred depths of thy knowledge. How futile my efforts to visualize the magnitude of the power inherent in thine handiwork, the revelation of thy creative power. When I contemplate, O my God, the relationship that bindeth me to thee, I am moved to proclaim to all created things, verily, I am God. And when I consider my own self, lo, I find it coarser than clay. Very mysterious, this dual nature of the manifestation of God. In the Agon and in other important tablets cited in the Gleanings, Baha'u'llah elaborates this twofold nature of the manifestation. He divides it into two parts: the inner being of the manifestation, which is identical with this world of command, which is the same as the will of God we read in the writings of the Bab, and the outer nature, his individual person, his name, his mission, his history. The first is a station of pure abstraction and essential unity. They are all the prophets of God, one soul and the same person at that level. So if one returns and says, I am Moses, I am Christ, I am Adam, but all is fine. Because that is that singular voice of the inner reality of the manifestation. The first station, he says in another passage, which is related to his innermost reality, representeth him as one whose voice is the voice of God himself. To this testifieth the tradition, Islamic tradition. Manifold and mysterious is my relationship with God. I am He Himself, and He is I myself, except that I am, and He is that He is. Did you get that one? I am He Himself, and He is I myself, except that I am, and He is that He is. I don't think we're ever going to work this one out. But as far as we're concerned, certainly our approach to God, our seeing the face of God, our communing with the self of God is facilitated best through directing ourselves to the manifestation of God. and, if you will, to the manifestation of God in our day, although that's the same reality that's stretching out over the whole universal cycle. He's the person of God in our midst, so to speak. In fact, in one of his tablets, he says, the personality of God, Abdu'l-Baha says, is in the manifestation, not in the essence. That is how you would conceive someone to kind of have an idea about. And you know, sometimes we don't like thinking of the manifestation or the person of the manifestation to direct our prayers to, or through, if you will. It's a very subtle thing. We have to keep coming back to it, because the light comes through his reality to us, the brightest light. Of course, the light of God, the grace of God is everywhere. It's infinite. And people spontaneously turn to God. But how do they conceive God? Because it's so far beyond. We've been given this sign of God, so to speak, which is the person of the manifestation, which helps us to focus and center our prayers. Think of how the implications of that when you go to Baji, when you're there, when you center on Baha'u'llah and you think about him and the role that he plays in mediating divine light into the realms of creation, into the realms of this world. On the one hand, he is God himself. On the other hand, he's not. He's a manifestation. He's a mirror. If the sun in the mirror says to us, I am the sun, he says it's the truth. If, on the other hand, the mirror says, no, that's not the sun, that's also true. The two things are true at the same time. And our nature, in a sense, friends, there are spiritual realities, Abdu'l-Baha says, which apply at the same principle will apply at different levels of existence. For instance, the manifestation of God says, when I try to understand what is moving me on the part of God, that is when I try to see back from myself, within, all is closed and I don't see anything. But when I behold my role with respect to creation, the omniscience that the manifestation has with respect to every human soul, the immediacy that he has when any of us pray anywhere, in any of the worlds of God, all of that is a kind of consciousness which is totally beyond our comprehension. But he understands the world as he experiences it. Now, at our level, this reality is such that we don't really understand the manifestation of God. In fact, he kindly tells us that we really can't understand our own nature. The soul is a mysterious gem, and it's a reality created by God, and we really can't even comprehend our own nature, though we do a better job of understanding ourselves than we do our brother and sister Baha'is sometimes. So we understand the light of Baha'u'llah to the degree that it informs and allows us insight and vision into our lives and into our activities. In the same way that the manifestation understands that invisible power of God at his level in terms of the manifestation of God and giving forth the laws and ordinance of God to creation, ordering creation, setting it on a path which allows for this knowledge and love of God to grow. Abdu'l-Baha, in his turn, in Some Answered Questions, which is the book that together with the Conceiving you want to master. Shoghi Effendi says the Baha'is who want to be competent teachers, they should master the contents of the Conceiving and Some Answered Questions, which obviously requires repeated returning to it and thinking about it and if you will, letting the truths of the one interact with the truths of the other. So it's, of course, all the expression of one light. He talks about three aspects of the manifestation of God, which you're familiar with, I'm sure. The first is the physical nature. He has a body made out of physical atoms like you and I. But the comparison there includes in a tablet that Baha'u'llah revealed about the nature of the manifestation, called the Loh-i-Suhur, the tablet of the manifestation. He says that the matter, the dust that people are made with, is common to everybody, is common to the manifestation, but his atoms are like in the station of diamonds, whereas we may be, I don't know what else, but we hope we will be heavenly gems eventually. We need all the fire of tests and difficulties and things to kind of forge us to make the gold of our inner being pure. But he has this diamantine inner nature, which streams of light come forth into this world, even physically in a sense. The power and influence of the manifestation is such that we have testimonies about how people had such a difficult time looking at him in the face. Such a power, such a presence was there. The physical being of the manifestation of God, Baha'u'llah says in the same tablet, he says, is as a ring which the inner nature of God places on his own finger. That is, this universal reality places this physical being as a ring on his finger, and he turns it as he willeth, he says. Secondly, the manifestation of God has a soul. But here the difference between the manifestation and the rest of us becomes apparent. He says that the soul of the manifestation, different from the human soul, which comes into being at the moment of conception, that is, it has a beginning, though it has no end. The manifestation soul has had no beginning. It's eternal with the creation of God. And the souls of the manifestations pre-exist in the world before they descend into this world and take on a physical form and live here. He says, we don't know the nature, Shoghi Effendi said, we don't know the nature of that world, so we don't know what was there, activity or condition. But they come from the realm, in one tablet, it says that their souls, our souls, ascend through the 7 valleys, if you will, or all these various stages of spiritual progress. But the soul of the manifestation comes from that highest realm, the dominion on high. For the Persian friends, the Alam-e Jabarut. The soul of the manifestation lives there even when he's dwelling here. He doesn't go through these stages again. He has it all from the beginning. The higher nature, again, is present in him. He is like a throne. This soul of the manifestation, and his physical being even, is like a throne upon which the divine spirit settles and sets and speaks forth to us. The third stage, which is this divine spirit that has settled upon him, is the divine effulgence present in his nature. The radiance, the light, the glory, the splendor of God, which is so inherent in Baha'u'llah. Let's think about the manifestation of God in Baha'u'llah, who comes and he says over and over in the Akdas in different places, verily, verily, I am God and there is no God but me. We wonder at the power of such a statement. How different that is from Muhammad, who says to the people, he gathers the people and he says, people, I want to tell you that I heard from the angel Gabriel, who said he heard from God to tell me to tell you to, shape up. Look at the distance of the revelation at that stage. The revealer, how he's still veiled in those preliminary stages of progressive revelation. Even though at times he would say the divine verses, very penetrating things. And the Quran is the word of God to feed the masses for 1,200 years. Yet, there was a distance there. Whereas in this day, he says it's the beloved himself who's arrived and is proclaiming to us the light of the kingdom, who has thrown open the doors of the spiritual realms and invited us in. And all the tablets you're familiar with, I'm sure, and the gleanings and things that tell you about that. he says again about the manifestations. They have been made manifest in the uttermost state of servitude, a servitude the like of which no man can possibly attain. Thus, in moments in which these essences of being were deep immersed beneath the oceans of ancient and everlasting holiness, or when they soared to the loftiest summits of divine mysteries, they claimed their utterances to be the voice of divinity, the call of God himself. And again, were any of the all-embracing manifestations of God to declare, I am God, he verily speaketh the truth, and no doubt attacheth thereto. For it hath been repeatedly demonstrated that through their revelation, their attributes and names, the revelation of God, his names and his attributes, are manifest in the world. One side of the ledger. The other side of the ledger, Shoghi Effendi, calling us to a caution. The divinity attributed to so great a being and the complete incarnation of the names and attributes of God in so exalted a person as Baha'u'llah in this case, should under no circumstances be misconceived or misinterpreted. The human temple that has been made the vehicle of so overpowering a revelation must, if we be faithful to the tenets of our faith, ever remain entirely distinguished from that innermost spirit of spirits, that eternal essence of essences, that invisible yet rational God, however much we extol the divinity of his manifestations on earth, can in no wise incarnate his infinite, his unknowable, his incorruptible, and all-embracing reality in the concrete and limited frame of a mortal being. That Baha'u'llah should, notwithstanding the overwhelming intensity of his revelation, be regarded as essentially one of these manifestations of God, never to be identified with that invisible reality, the essence of divinity itself, is one of the major beliefs of our faith, a belief which should never be obscured and the integrity of which no one of its followers should allow to be compromised. In a letter written on behalf of The Guardian, he says, Baha'u'llah is, of course, not God and not the Creator, but through him we can know God, and because of this position of divine intermediary, in a sense, he is all we can ever know of that infinite essence, which is God. Therefore, we address ourselves in prayer and thought to him and through him, to that infinite essence behind and beyond him. In everyday practice, we embrace Baha'u'llah as the source of our knowledge of God. He says that this knowledge of God is identical with the knowledge of the manifestation of God, as far as human beings are concerned. But we always retain that there is that innermost essence of essences behind everything. The infinite, unknowable, unnameable, unmentionable God. If we have that straight, we can extol Baha'u'llah and his phrases of he is God and this is the day of God himself who's come. And I think we'll find that in this dispensation, we will celebrate that so much of the revelation has come to us in the first person of God, in the voice of divinity itself, divine verses. From that level, which is an affirmation of the truth, I am God. The modes of revelation, you perhaps have seen mention of that in the translation of the Surah Hekal. Baha'u'llah talks about 9 modes of revelation. In the Bab's writings, he talks about 5 modes, and he says 4 of them are the ones that were present in Islam, and then one that he's added is the mode of the revelation of those previous 4 modes, but in Persian verses. And he describes these 4 modes. He says that the top one, which corresponds to that inner being of the manifestation of God, that universal reality of the manifestation of God, and is an affirmation of the words he is, or I am God, the first person statement from that level, is the way he identifies the divine verses, the heavenly verses that are in the first person of God. You think of the tone of the hidden words, for example. All the hidden words are revealed in that tone. Love me that I may love thee if thou lovest me not, and so on. All of those have to do with this inner nature of the manifestation of God, which is the voice of God, so to speak. The second mode of revelation that he describes, which derives from the first one, is the individual reality of the manifestation of God. So you have the level of divinity, then you have the level of servitude. And the Bab, in describing these, he says that the manifestation of God assumes the position of servitude to teach us how to adore and pray to that inner reality of his. So he provides a model for us. And Shoghi Effendi, recognizing this very early on, took his time to reveal, to translate a whole book of prayers and meditations by Baha'u'llah. One of the great sources of understanding of the nature of the manifestation of God is that book. It's a book that we should study, perhaps too often. I find myself guilty of that too. I pick up the book, I want to pray. I open the book and I say, "Thou seest me in my prison." No, that's not me. And I skip over that. And we have a third of the book are meditations of Baha'u'llah about his own nature, his sufferings, his relationship to God. We've never had anything like that, friends, in divine revelation in the past. Don't deprive yourselves of that. You say, well, meditation's important. Yes. Those are the kind of things you want to meditate on. You want to find them, read them, think about them. So go to that book at times when you're not necessarily going to say the prayer that you're looking for. But find and identify those passages where Baha'u'llah is speaking in the first person. We all get caught up in one of those where we're reading with all thing that says, "Thou seest me endowed with the power to subdue the whole creation." And then you say, oh, that's not me again, you know. But it tells us something about the nature of the manifestation. So we want to have that in our scale of values too. And it's this level of servitude which he, in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, qualifies by a verse also from Islam, where he says, servitude is a substance, the essence of which is divinity. You see how his outer nature is mirroring forth and drawing us, attracting us to his inner nature, to his inner being. This stage is the affirmation of the words, "Thou art God." The first stage, "I am God." The second stage, "Thou art God." The third level of revelation, of verses, he refers to as commentaries, explanations, an affirmation of the truth, He is God, explanations about it. I am God, Thou art God. He is God. And finally, the fourth level of revelation, which are discourses and rational arguments and discussions revealed by the manifestation of God, which correspond to the words, He is God who, whatever explanation is being given about it. These four modes of revelation, moreover, the Bab identifies with the rivers of the Kawthar, of the throne of God in the highest paradise. And he says the heart of the manifestation of God is this divine throne. And these four kinds of verses flow out from him. And this is this magic explanation that's been given before about those rivers being made of water, milk, honey, and wine. And you have the water corresponding to these divine verses in the divine voice itself, milk as prayers, honey as commentaries, and wine as rational discourses and arguments. So you get this picture of all of these prophecies of the past being opened and explained and elucidated for us in the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Now, I wanted to say a bit, you realize that the manifestation is characterized in so many different ways in the writings. You just think for a second now. what is one of the metaphors for the manifestation of God? What is one of his titles? Maybe you'll come up with the heavenly gardener who tends the tender plants of human nature and waters them, or the sun of truth that shines on the, if you will, the landscape of our inner beings with his heavenly light. Or the teacher in the school of the prophets that comes repeatedly to educate and enlighten our souls. I found one the other day of the master. He calls him the tailor. The kingdom of God is as a tailor that comes and stitches together all the fragments and pieces and patches of humanity into one celestial robe to adorn the world. Here you are, from every place, all over the world, knit together by the consciousness of his being, and the fact that he is the seam sewer. He is knitting us all together, despite sometimes you feel that he's actually punctured you instead of knitting you together because of something that one of your fellow human beings has bothered you with. But that's all part of the process. The judge, the lawgiver. We already mentioned about the ocean. He identifies himself as the breath of God, how he breathed life into all things. This is this inner will of God. To the will of God has brought all things into creation. He's especially the Word of God. When he's alive, he is the living Word. He is the temple of God. And the Heikal is a very important work because it describes for us, it sets forth, if you will, the credentials. God gives us the credentials of the manifestation of God. Once established what his position is in creation with respect to all the other levels of life and existence, then he moves on to tell the kings, now that you know who I am, this is what you should do. And then he commands them. But he establishes this, his essential identity first, so to speak. He is the living Word, and he describes us as words and letters. He's the living book, and he describes us as the words and letters of that book, in the sense of when you have the picture of the universal reality, the manifestation of God, then we are like words and letters generated within that book. None of us complete, but the book is all of us. It is the living community which pulsates to the bounty and blessings of Baha'u'llah. In the Heikal, he switches back by saying that in one sense he is the book, but then he switches back to say that the verses are the book. And we understand by this that he means that in his absence, the book becomes the presence of God, the verses of God, because they are a distillation, if you will, of his own spirit. This is a mysterious thing when you think of it, friends. The manifestation of God in his inner nature receives the light of God, and he begins to chant verses, the holy verses of God which educate and illumine us, and they become physical sound. Not only physical sound, but the secretary is there making some black scratches on a piece of paper. The whole of this divine impulse has become constrained, controlled by some little black marks on a sheet of paper. 100 years later, you pick up this paper and you begin reading this. And since you are an index of the universe, since you are a hologram, if you will, of all existence, the meanings are latent, inherent in your being. And as you read those things, the corresponding realities set themselves alive again within you. If the mirror is clean, if the intention is pure. So there it comes back alive again. It's become spirit again. It moves you to arise and be a knight of Baha'u'llah for Saint something or another, one of these islands out somewhere out there. You know? Strange how the interaction between spirit and matter. Think of just the mysteries of that alone are amazing. Baha'u'llah out of deference to the friends, would excuse them when he felt the attraction, the impulse to reveal verses. Now, we want to write something, you know, we sit down with the paper and we scratch our head and we think we'd write this and we scratch it out and we do it again. We know House of Justice does this too. Actually, it finally comes out with what it wants, but it works through several drafts working on. The manifestation of God doesn't have that particular difficulty. He can reveal verses from the morning until the evening, and he's transformed when he's doing it. And we have a few testimonies about what the manifestation, what state he was in when he was revealing these words of God, the divine words. And Mirza Ghajan, who was the principal amanuensis, the secretary, he writes that when Baha'u'llah was revealing, he would relieve the friends, he would excuse them because it was overwhelming. People would pass out. There is a story of Ruhullah's brother asked if he could be present when the verses were revealed. He was curious. And they asked, the family asked Baha'u'llah. They called him one day, called him to the mansion, to the room of Baha'u'llah. And they said, Baha'u'llah wants to see you. And he went to the curtain there of the room. And they said, go in, just open and go in. He steps inside the room, and he says he saw Baha'u'llah was pacing, and he was chanting. And Baha'u'llah looked up at him with a smile. And he says, as he looked at me, and as I heard these words, my knees began to buckle. And I fell, and as I was falling down, Baha'u'llah said to me, Huda Hafiz, goodbye. And then they pulled him out from under the threshold and went and put some rose water on him, and he said, what happened to me? And he says, you asked to be present when Baha'u'llah was revealing. So it wasn't for everybody, this particular capacity to be able to take that. Now he says, Agha-Jan has written a few phrases. He says that Baha'u'llah's face would begin to shine like the sun. The rays of light coming out from him would be overwhelming. And he himself says numerous times he would swoon away at the revelation that was coming from Baha'u'llah. You'd have these verses, Baha'u'llah would be reciting them one after the other. He said, I could get down 1 in 5 of the verses. Now, obviously, friends, there had to be an editorial process later where Baha'u'llah looked at the notes of the amanuensis, and they worked it out until they had the tablet the way it was to be copied and to go out. But it was overwhelming. They couldn't do it. Sometimes somebody else would have to be called. And there were 2 secretaries, 3 secretaries trying to take these things down. He said that his words would become endowed with such power. It was as if you were listening to peals of thunder rolling off the manifestation. And at such times, you couldn't decipher the words themselves. They were words, but you were so overwhelmed by the power of it that you couldn't take that in. We have the testimony of a wonderful servant, Haji Mirza Haider Ali, one of the great servants of Baha'u'llah, who was allowed to enter the presence of Baha'u'llah at the time of revelation, and later has left to posterity the following account, a paragraph. Let me just read that for you. This was in Akka. When permission was granted and the curtain was withdrawn, I entered the room where the King of Kings and the ruler of this world and the next, nay, rather, the ruler of all the worlds of God, was with great authority seated on his couch. The verses of God were being revealed, and the words streamed forth as in a copious rain. Methought the door, the wall, the carpet, the ceiling, the floor, and the air were all perfumed and illumined. They all had been transformed, each and every one, into ears, and were filled with a spirit of joy and ecstasy. Each object had become refreshed and was pulsating with life. To which worlds I was transported, and in what state I was, no one who has not experienced such as this can ever know. There was a young man present in a meeting with the master in New England. And the master was speaking about the power of religion to educate us, enlighten us, how essential it was. And the young man begged forgiveness. He said, "Excuse me, Abdu'l-Baha, but first I want to get to know myself, and then this is wonderful, and I'll look into it." And Abdu'l-Baha's answer was, "Without light, nothing is seen." And friends, that's what we've got. We've got the light of the manifestation. And if we look for enlightenment anyplace else, it's entirely limited. Now, that doesn't mean you don't study and you don't go to university and all these things, because Baha'u'llah says acquire proficiency in all the arts and sciences. He wants the people of Baha to be illumined in the best way in everything to do, both with material sciences and spiritual sciences, which he speaks about too, which are the understanding of these mysteries and heavenly realities. Our time is coming to an end. There's one thing else I wanted to share with you a bit, which is again one of my own kind of meanderings and thoughts on the subject. And that is, we're told that the human reality, we read about this earlier, all the names and attributes of God are reflected in each soul, potentially. And we're also told that every human soul is different from every other human soul. Now, that truth at another level gives you the fact that every fingerprint is different, or every leaf of the trees all over the world is different. There is that uniqueness, which seems to be a reflection of God's name, the unique, the one. It also stamps itself on all physical realities and all spiritual realities. But if we're all the expressions of all the attributes of God, then how is it that each one of us is different from the other? And it seems to me that the solution to this riddle is in the proportion of the names of God present in each of us. It's as if there's a spectrum, there's a frequency, there's something different in each of us, quite distinct from every other human being that lives, that has lived, that will live, and that marks you with the uniqueness that is a reflection of the uniqueness of God. If that mirror of yours is not faced towards the light of truth, those expression of that particular bouquet, if you will, of that particular spectrum of divine names, which is your reality, will be deprived. Creation will be deprived of it. Abdu'l-Baha says envy is ridiculous because nobody can ever do what someone else is supposed to do or can do in the cause. No. Each of us must strive to reflect that reality that is their own true inner being. And Baha'u'llah says in one of the early tablets in the Gleanings, he says, that is the same as the knowledge of God. Attaining to an understanding of your own being. Attaining to a consciousness of the light of Baha'u'llah motivating those divine names and attributes which are your reality. In one of the tablets of Abdu'l-Baha, they asked him, why is it that people, the great learned ones, the mystics and saints, describe God in such different ways? And he says it's because of the dominant name of God in that soul. Each of those souls has one of the dominant names of God. Maybe you've read Ruhiya Khanum's Growing Pains of a Spiritual Assembly. You know, you have Mrs. Mercy and Mr. Justice and Mr. Fair-Mindedness and Lady Bounty and all these people that are constantly, any subject that comes up, they say, well, we have to remember to be loving, you know. We can't be harsh. And another one says, if you don't impose the law of God, there'll never be any progress. And we know the cast of characters. Now, I think Baha'u'llah said if you get 9 of those people together, you get a nice balance, some kind of a moderation and a balancing out of the understanding of these different individuals, and you can trust to move forward with it. Now, obviously, the more that the mirrors are polished, the more they will reflect this light. Another thing that seems to confirm this point of view is that Baha'u'llah, when he's asked about the next world and the activities of the souls in the next world, One of the things, of course, he says is that the souls of the believers will be ushered into the presence of the prophets and messengers of God. And they will ask us what we've suffered in the path, in the way of God. Well, friends, if we haven't suffered anything, it'll be a very short interview. But if our whole life has been given over to sacrificing ourselves for the cause of God, it will have an eternal character. Then he says another thing that the souls wish to do in the other world is to witness the reality of every sanctified soul. And my understanding of this is that's the soul that's managed to turn the mirror towards the light of God, polish the mirror sufficiently so that that uniqueness of his own person, his own spiritual presence and reality, which is always so distinct from everybody else, becomes manifest. And that's your gift to creation. And